Greetings, everyone. How you doing today? The ambient ramblings of a analog synth to start us off with today. All right, so we're going to get started. We got to wait for a couple of people. I know there's going to be a couple of people not here today. So how's everybody doing otherwise? That's good. Let me just get all my cabling so that I don't get twisted up and things go falling all over the place. So today we're going to pick up with some of the stuff that we hinted at last week. I didn't talk about bit depth in detail last week. I wanted to save that for today. There's a reason for that. And we're going to look at waveforms in more detail, and we're going to look at elastic audio in more detail. And then there's a few other things that we could look at also, depending upon how our time is going. Right, this is a Novation Base Station 2. It's a mono synth with two oscillators and a sub oscillator, and it's really a great little synth for people to learn on. I think new it's like $500, but you can buy it used. And Novation's a great company. They actually update their stuff for free. So like with this particular synthesizer, they every so often they send out a firmware update that gives it new functionality that it didn't have before. So basically, this is it started off as a monophonic synthesizer, meaning you can only play one note at a time. And then through an upgrade, one of those free updates they did 5 years after it came out, which is amazing, it became a paraphonic synthesizer, which meant that you could play two notes at a time, but they shared the same envelope and filter settings. And it started taking on the characteristics of an ARP Odyssey at that point. But let me zoom in as far as I can here. All right, so we're going to look right in this area here. All right. Now, let me just make sure that I've got this set up. Oh, let me turn off that reverb. All right, so it has a little mixer right here. Let's see, zoom out. Right here, which controls the volume of each oscillator. So I've got oscillator 2 off. So I'm only listening to one of the sound generating doodads, oscillators. And right here, I don't know if you could see that, but there's wave shapes. I should have had a pencil or a pointer. Oh, well.
You can see.
Right, and the first one here is a sine wave. The second one is a triangle. It looks like a little triangle. The third one is a sawtooth. And then the fourth one is a square/pulse wave. And I'm going to show you those in Pro Tools shortly. And then over here, you've got your pitch range. So in other words, if I press this button, you can see that it moves. So if I'm here, it's like I'm playing the middle. I'm playing the middle C on that. Okay, a little rough. And then if I click here, it goes up an octave, right? So let's stay at the 8-foot mark. Now, let me make sure that So that's kind of like a sine wave. It's got some more things happening than the sine wave. If I click on the next one, you can hear a triangle wave, a sawtooth, very buzzy, and a pulse wave, or square wave, I'm sorry. So you can hear they all have a different timbre to them, right? And that's because they have different harmonic content. There's different overtones present in each sound. The one with the sawtooth is the buzziest, so it has the highest amount of overtone content in the sound. The square wave, the sine wave is the purest. But this sine wave has a little buzz to it. Actually, on this particular one, the triangle is the smoothest sound. even though it has overtones by definition. Now, let me zoom out again. Whoops. The big knob up here in the right-hand corner is a filter knob control. And then right here, which you can't see, there are, and this is just an introduction to, eventually I'm going to teach you guys the basics of tone shaping with equalizers, but I think that it's really a good way to learn how to use EQ, since from my perspective, EQ is a frequency-dependent volume control. So you control the volume of different frequencies or different overtones using EQ that are present in a sound. And a really great way to play around with that is to have your hands on something that changes the sound, right? So I'm going to play this sound here, and I've got this set to a low-pass filter with a slope of 12 with a slope of 12 decibels per octave. So that means for every octave below the cutoff point, the sound is reduced by 12 decibels. And then you can flip the switch and it's 24 decibels per octave. So let's take a listen at 12 decibels per octave. I'll play this note and I'm going to turn this knob. And let's actually do that with the sawtooth because that's the juiciest wave. And you can hear that I've reduced quite a bit of the output. You can see as I bring this up, it gets buzzier and buzzier because there's more overtones present. So I'm shaping the tone. Now, if I do 24 decibels per octave, that should have more dramatic effect. You can hardly hear anything now at all. So now there's one other control. There's something called resonance. And what resonance does is that it emphasizes those frequencies that are at the cutoff point. So whatever frequency this is affecting, the resonance, which is this knob here, will emphasize that frequency. So in other words, if you were to look at it on a graph, it would look like a little peak notch filter. So there'd be a cutoff that looks like this. So it goes straight and then it does like an arc down. Right where it starts to arc down, there'll be like a little jump up for a small distance in the graph. That's really the best way I can describe it. You'd have to see it. You'd know it. Like if I showed it to you, you'd understand what I was talking about. But it's more important to hear what it does. So if I play this. You hear those wow, wow. It's almost like a vocal quality. And you get like almost like a wow. You have a really juicy filter on this. It really screams, you know. And then I bring the resonance down. Now if I bring the frequency down.
Can you switch your camera? Here's your camera.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Okay, let me do that again. Thank you, Mark. So I've got no filter, right? I'll bring the cutoff filter down. And I'm going to jack up the resonance. And you can start hearing it now. Wow. You can really get some crazy effects. And so I'll bring the frequency down. And it's interesting because if you do a different sound like the triangle wave, you can hear as I change the frequency, there's all sorts of crazy stuff you can do with that.
Is your cutoff frequency being modulated right now?
Yes, yes, a little bit. Mm-hmm. but but that is a characteristic of this filter to do that kind of really wild driving. It has an overdrive built into it as well. It has a separate distortion over here, which I turned down. I could really. So, all right. So, waveforms, different sounds, low pass filter does exactly what it says it does. It lets the low frequencies pass. No, Andrew, no, I don't think that sine wave, triangle, and sawtooth exist naturally. That's not my take on it. I could be wrong, but that's not my take on it. Okay, so a low pass filter lets the low frequencies pass through and attenuates the higher frequencies. All right, so that's basically, it does what it says it does. Low pass, it lets low frequencies pass. Now this, I can flip a switch here, and then I can do a high pass filter. So let's get this. See, so it does it the opposite. Right? It's attenuating the low frequencies, and you're hearing just the high frequencies. And then you add that resonance there, and you can really. You can almost hear the pitches up there, right? As I twist it. Those are overtones that exist that are being emphasized and that are in that sound. All right, so that's step one. Let me turn off this camera because the battery on this one will die shortly. That's like I'm running my own TV studio here while I'm teaching. I've got like 3 cameras and then the input from the screen. It's hard. I got that third camera in for this because I have like just a regular video switcher that I have in line, plugged in line. So I have to push a button there so that I can get this screen now. And I have to always remember to do all this stuff, which is why if I forget to change the screen and you guys remind me of it, it's actually very helpful. All right, so let me close out this session here. And let's go here. And let's go to Pro Tools and let's open Recent. Okay. Pro Tools comes with a really cool device. It's called a signal generator, I believe, and I believe it's an other. Yep. Signal generator, right? And what you do is you plug this into an audio track, and you can generate a sine wave, a square wave, a sawtooth, a triangle, white noise, and pink noise and for these first 4 at any frequency and at any level. So it's a really good tool to have that will it's very helpful, especially for what I'm about to show you now. So let's look over here at this guy here. Hold on a second. All right, so this looks like a steady block, right? But as I zoom in using the T key, you can see that it changes, right? And this is a sine wave at 60 hertz, meaning that there are 60 cycles in every second. So remember that this line, imaginary line that goes across the middle, that's rest point, null point, 0 point. I'm not sure what the exact name for that is. I guess I should learn that since I'm teaching these classes. But you just have to realize that from left to right is frequency. In other words, the number of vibrations per second, in which case in this particular waveform there are 60 of them. And from the bottom to the top, right, or from this middle line to the top, or from the middle of the line to the bottom, that is amplitude. That's volume. Now, I've seen this two ways, that from the top, from the peak to the next peak, that's considered one cycle. I've also seen it from the crossing line to the next crossing line is one cycle. Or maybe it would be like from this crossing line to this crossing line, right? One complete cycle. So in other words, from one position in this sort of helix, to where that comes back in again. That is one cycle. And if I change my time base to minutes and seconds, here, sorry. That takes up one, like 0.016 of a second. And if I do this, I make my grid 1 second. Right there. And I count, you could see, if I counted all of these, there would be 60 of them in that 1 second. And what happens is that these are vibrations. And they go through the cycle where it starts here at no volume, peak volume, gets quieter, no volume, peak volume in the other direction, no volume, right? And so you can actually, when things are really low, you can hear the frequencies pulsing, right? Even though it's one sound, but you can actually hear those things pulsing. That's when it's crossing that threshold where there's no volume, right? You can actually hear those things. And when you hear vibrato on a synthesizer, very often it's created by a low frequency oscillator, which is vibrating at 10, 15, what you said it, but pulses per second, right? Below what you can actually hear. And the shape of that waveform modulates or affects the regular tone, and the waveform shapes the sound of the synthesizer, and it can shape it in terms of volume, in terms of pitch, in terms of how the filter is unfolding, all sorts of stuff like that. It's really cool. But before you get into that, you have to understand these waveforms. So let's do this. This is an oscilloscope. Ooh, we're doing science, man. And I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to play this. And you could see that this, right? And I don't know if you could hear that because it's really low. It looks just like that. So you can see that it's accurate. Now, if we open up this guy here and we look at our frequency, right, we could see it's supposed to be 60, but according to this, it's a little above 60. And you could see that there are some other frequencies in there. It's supposed to be a pure wave, but I've never seen a sine wave that's pure. But you don't see any spikes over here, which you will see once we start doing the other waveforms. Now this one here, right? Let's make both this one big and this one big. So this is at 120 hertz, right? So it's twice the frequency of this. So there's twice as many vibrations or complete cycles. So in other words, if I go, let's say I go from here, let's see, do I have this lined up? Not quite lined up. But if I go from here to here, right, you could see that this is one cycle in about half a cycle here. If I go 2 cycles, right, you could see now that we're at 1 cycle, because even though this isn't lined up with the peaks, you could see that where it's intersecting this line, it's in the same spot here and here, right? So you could see that there are 2 cycles here for every one of these cycles, because it's vibrating at 120 vibrations a second. So let's take a listen to this. So that one you should be able to hear, right? And you'll notice, though, that the height of both of these is the same because the volume is the same. Now, both of these together, you can hear that there's octaves and then single one. Now, let's look at sine wave 4. So this is 240 hertz, right? So this is twice the frequency of this. So if I do 1 here, right, you can see that there's 2 down here. And you can see if I go up here, it's half on the 60 per second. So let's listen to 240. So there's 240 vibrations in a second, right? We can't differentiate with our ears that those are individual cycles that have at some point no volume at all in them. They're happening so fast that we hear them like a continuous sound, much like 24, 30, 60 frames per second of video footage. It looks like a continuous action to you, right? So our ears are hearing that in a certain way because we just can't pick out those individual vibrations. They're happening too fast for us. Now, let's move on to square wave, right? So let's do a square wave at 60 hertz. Now, before we play that, let me just hide this one for a second. And let me hide this one for a second. Let me hide this one. Okay. So the reddish one, that's a square wave. And it doesn't look exactly like a square because that's just the way that Pro Tools does it. That looks more like a rectangle. But that's a square wave. And let's take a listen. You're hardly going to hear this sound. Whoops. I'm going to play the sine wave at 60. Right? I don't know if you can hear that. It's very low. I don't know if you can hear it over Zoom. I'm going to play the square wave. It's at the same volume. You could see that the, let me make these the same height. You could see that they're the same height, both of these, right? So that means they're the same volume. But when I play the square wave, you're going to perceive it as being louder. Like significantly louder. And can anybody venture a guess as to why that might be?
It has more harmonic content.
Correct. So the sine wave a pure sine wave has only the fundamental, no overtones. The square wave has, I believe, it's either the odd or the even harmonics added to it. I should have that memorized, but I'm dyslexic, so forgive me. So you're hearing all those additional harmonics, and let's do our oscilloscope, right? You could see that looks like a rectangle. But now when we go to our analyzer, you're going to see a pitch here, and then you're going to see some spiky stuff going on up in this area here. See that? So those are all additional pitches that are found in that one pitch. So let's try an experiment. I'm going to put in an EQ called EQ31, which comes with Pro Tools. You all have it. And this is a very handy little device because it has filters, right? So I'm going to click here, and this is a low-pass filter, very similar to what I had on my synthesizer, okay? So I'm going to open this up, and then I'm going to open up this right here. And then I'm going to set the frequency all the way up there, and I'm going to play that. And as I bring the filter down, I've actually changed that so that it almost sounds like a sine wave now, right? Because I've adjusted the volume, right? Remember I said EQ, and a filter is an EQ of sorts, is frequency or overtone-based volume control. So with that low-pass filter, I attenuated all of those higher pitched overtones that are found in the square wave. I made them softer, and the resulting pitch that you hear is more, it's mostly the fundamental, which is basically what a sine wave is. So I've used EQ to change the timbre of a square wave to make it into a sine wave. It's very powerful. Right? Everybody understand that? Right? I'm using the filter to turn down the volume of those harmonics or overtones present in the square wave. And what's left over is just the fundamental. And you can, you could turn down the volume of some of them. And depending upon the slope of this by the Q of the filter, you can change. So in other words, this is gentler, so you'll hear more high frequency content. And as I bring this up, let me zoom in on that so you can see it a little easier. So it says 6 dB per octave. And if I click and bring this up, you see that this becomes steeper. You hear less of the overtones. Less. And none, practically. Okay. So, whoops, excuse me. Let me zoom out. All right, so let's listen to our triangle wave at 60. Let's listen. That's at 30. Let's listen to it at 60. So the triangle wave has a little bit of that buzz to it because it has the same kinds of harmonics as the square wave, but they're not as loud, right? So you could see that the waveform looks like a triangle. And if we bring up our oscilloscope, you can see it there as well. And again, these are all the same volume. But you perceive some as being louder because they have more overtones in them that get your ear. So now the one that's going to be the loudest is the sawtooth because it's got the most overtones in it of all. Right? You can look at this meter here. So if I bring up, I can do this. Right, and whoops, excuse me. And here's our output meter right here. You could see it's a little above minus 24, but you can really hear that sawtooth. If I go to the sine wave, oh, that's a square wave, excuse me. Right, see, that's same volume, a little bit above minus 24, and you could barely hear that compared to the sine wave. So that's just an interesting phenomenon about volume and level, right? So, you guys are going to play live, and some of you have like amplified instruments, and you think that if you can't hear yourself, you got to turn the volume up. Well, that's not always true. You got to change your sound, you know, because you could turn up this sound really loud and you might be heard more, but you're going to create a lot of mud because you got a lot of other frequency. You got that low frequency in there that's probably going to be, you know, fighting with the bass and fighting with the kick drum to be heard. So it's just an interesting phenomenon about how the tone of your instrument determines how well you can hear it, you know. And I just showed you right here scientifically, like that the meter was at the same spot for 3 different sounds, and the sawtooth sounded significantly louder. We perceived it as being significantly louder than the sine wave, and that's because there's more overtones in it, and those overtones are easier to hear. So, okay. Now, you see this and this, right? It's the same pitch. Well, let's actually do it with a square wave because it'll be easier to hear. Right? It's twice as it's louder. And you could see that the height, in other words, the bit from here to here is greater, right? So that's volume, amplitude, the height of the wave. Now, don't get confused because I have had you guys had this turned off up here, the zoom control, but if you want to now, click on this right here. Oh, I'm blocking that. You can't see it. Hold on. Click on this triangle right here and activate the zoom controls, right? You can click here and change the waveform height, and then you can click on the bottom of this and make it smaller. Don't let that fool you, all right? You can definitely see that this is skinnier than that, right? That just basically means this is louder. It's got more amplitude. Now, here's a cool little thing I've got set up here with these 3 guys here. Right? So each one of these is going to get a little louder, and you'll hear it one after the other. Right? The distance between in the cycle doesn't change. It's still this. This is still one cycle. That is 0.26. If I go to the louder place, right, and I do the same thing, well, let's see. Here we go. So it's 0.16. If I do it from here to here, right, 0.17. It's 0.16. I'm not being completely accurate here, but you can see you know what I mean? The length of the wave is the same, complete cycle is the same, but it's just the height of the waveform has changed, and that makes it louder. So those are simple waveforms, right? All right, so now right here in this area here, let me zoom in on that. Right, I'm going to stack a sine wave, a triangle wave, and a sawtooth wave together. And I think it'd be kind of cool to open up our oscilloscope and see what happens when I stack them together. Now you can see how different that is, right? You see how crazy that looks? That is a very complex waveform because all of the overtones from each of those different sounds is added together to create that unusual wave shape. And if we look at our frequency graph, you could see like this is what it looks like. You got all these, it's one pitch, it's the same pitch, right? They're all 240, I believe.
They're all
What?
they're all in phase with each other, right?
Yep. No, I screwed up and left them all out of phase so I'd lose all the low end. Just a joke.
The waveform would look completely different if everything was in phase.
What was that, Mark?
The waveform would look completely different if each of the zero crossings were lined up with all the waves.
Oh, yeah, that's true. But I'm not sure you want to do that with something like this. You want to get a nice sound. Right, so this is all the same volume. So here I've got three different pitches. I've got 60, 120, and 30. Right, so that's really so there are no there's no phase issue there. There are three different pitches, right? The phase issue only comes into being when they all start at the same spot, and you can see what a crazy looking waveform that is. So let me import an audio file. Let me search for an audio file and. Yeah, let me import this. So now this is a track with drums, bass, keyboards, and you could see how complex the waveform is. But each one of these events is a different instrument or combination of instruments. Right? You could hear that those were two snare drum hits, right? Now, obviously, there's other sounds that are hanging over. So if we just highlight that. So that's that combination of those instruments. It's a kick drum, which gives us a really sharp attack at the beginning, the transient. We went over that. But then there's strings, and there's electric piano, and there's bass, all in that one little bit there. And then this here, right, that's a little bit more of that. And then what's this guy here? Right, so that's a snare drum, a hi-hat. There's some other keyboard instrument in there. So when you're looking at these complex waveforms like this, if we do this guy here, right, you can almost follow along where the waveform gets bigger. Those are louder areas, right? And where there's a sharp attack, it's usually some sort of drum. There's a very defined transient that's almost certainly a drum hit of some sort in this kind of a piece. And then if we open up this guy here, right, we can see. we've got frequencies all over the place, you know. Antiphase. Uh-oh. Means when I play it back in mono, you won't hear it. All right. So any questions on that so far? Right? That's a lot to digest. But the big thing to get from here is the number, what a cycle, like what a waveform cycle is on those pure waveforms or those fundamental waveforms, right? And how pitch is defined by the number of those complete cycles per second. Amplitude, volume, that's the height of the waveform. And it goes up and down, and that's like if you put your hand on a speaker while music is playing, it'll be vibrating, and the speaker cone will actually be moving in and out. And you could think of like the positive as when when it's shooting air at you, and the negative when it's pulling the air back, right? That's sort of like what that's how I kind of visualize that when it goes below the center line. Yeah. So, and then the other thing to remember too is that two sounds at the same pitch and the same exact volume on a meter, right? When you look at it scientifically, can be perceived at different volumes dependent upon the amount of harmonic content in each sound. And that once you start removing some of that harmonic content, you can change and alter a sound. And you can do that either with a low pass filter or a high pass filter. Right, I didn't do it with a high pass filter. So let's get our sawtooth wave here. No, let's go a little bit lower. Let's see. Okay. So let's put our EQ1 in. And then if we click here, this is a high pass filter. And you notice it brings down all the stuff in the blue area here as no volume. And then up here, you can hear all these and you can change the frequency here. Or you can just click and drag like that. Right? And it says high pass and this is low pass. You can see how they're opposite of each other. So if I do a high pass filter, like at 15, you're still hearing stuff. At 20, that's as high as it goes. I can still hear that there's harmonic content in there, right? So that's how much actual overtones are in a sawtooth wave. They're just rich with them, and that's why they're so buzzy, and they cut through. And so you could think about like a saxophone can have quite a buzz to it, depending upon if you're Ben Webster or not. Right? Like, and think about how Coltrane sometimes can, make his saxophone just screaming. He's adding overtones into that sound. You think of an oboe, very, very, very buzzy sound. Lots of overtones in an oboe, which means that it will cut through a mix. Yeah. Okay, so that was about almost an hour on that. I thought that was a good introduction. Now, let's talk about bit depth.
Hey, Pete, before you move on.
Yes, Ken.
So basically, harmonics are equal to high frequency information.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying? So anything that has a high frequency is a harmonic above the pitch, above the pitch. So,
yeah, it's an overtone. It's like an organ drawbar.
Right.
So that's like when when you're listening to music, right? You've been trained since you're an engineer to listen for frequencies.
Correct.
Well, I'm a musician. I listen for the harmonics in a sound, right? Because that's how I voice my chords and all that stuff. It's just a different frame of reference for the same thing. I think.
Okay. All right. Great. I mean that clarified some things for me. Thank you.
Yeah, but you knew that stuff already, right?
Yeah, but I mean I never quite put together the equalizing and the fact that like a bell is going to be a lot of just high harmonics. I was thinking more pitch related, I guess, that if you hit a high note, it's going to have that center point and then high harmonics on top. I don't know, but I enjoyed that. It was very good. Thanks, Pete.
Yeah, I just feel like almost everybody, like I've got a lot of graduate students in this class that are all jazz majors, right? And I tried for a long time I struggle with how to teach this stuff. And then it dawned on me that it's easier for them to understand that those are actual pitches that are contained in the overall timbre of a sound. And you can adjust the volume of those pitches, and they're related to the fundamental by some sort of harmonic measurement, you know. And the more harmonics in a sound, the more basically it's going to get buzzier. Basically, you know, the sound. I mean, that's a very simplistic way to put it, but I think for people that are just starting out to think about this stuff, right, you need like a good foundation that you can relate to. And if I start talking about frequencies, it doesn't have a context for somebody who's a musician and been studying harmony and chords and orchestration. So in other words, if you're going to orchestrate something and you're going to play, give me a second here. Just give me a second to... So the way it works for me, I play that chord, right? So that's G, D, A, B flat, D, and F, right? So that sounds good. That's different than that because when you're banging on it, you're hearing more overtones come out. It just doesn't get louder. If on a real piano, you're hearing more overtones, right? And you could take that same grouping of notes and play it like that, right? And that becomes like, if I play it soft, yes. That's not muddy. But if I play it like that, it's muddy. And that's bad orchestration all of a sudden, right? So when you're orchestrating, let's say you were going to write that for strings, it would mostly be basses, cellos, and violas, right? You might have everybody putting their mutes on, so you're not hearing the full range of overtones, and then you could write stuff down there, and it won't be muddy. So you wouldn't orchestrate that for a bunch of bassoons and contrabassoons that are double reed instruments that have a lot of overtones to them. So that's sort of how I always think about orchestration, and you can make things that wouldn't normally, you would think would be very muddy, you can make them work depending upon how you orchestrate them, the kinds of articulations and the kinds of playing techniques and the kinds of timbres you use, right? So that's sort of like you're controlling the fundamental pitches above. So in other words, when you're playing a chord like this really loud, there are pitches up here that you might not be able to pick out, but they're you're emphasizing like clusters of notes that become very dissonant and create mud down here. But if you're playing really soft, you're not bringing up those extra frequencies. So let's see if I can actually show that here. Oh, hold on. No, I can just drag this here. Why not? Okay. Right? You see all this stuff here? That's the mud. Not down here so much, because look, if I play this like this, that's not muddy, right? Because there's not all this additional information up here, and that's where the clusters of notes are in the overtone series, Anyway, that's tangential, but I think that that's very important to hear. You know, this is a side topic, but I know all you graduate students are going to be taking, most likely taking harmony classes with David Berkman, which is, you should do. But study of harmony is the most important thing you can do to bring out emotion in your music, right? Because rhythm is the most important thing in music. Melody is what people walk down the street humming and memorizing, and writing great melodies will make you more money. But if you want to touch somebody here with what you're writing, learn harmonies. There's so many ways to learn about harmonies. And when you learn about harmonies, it's not just the ordering of the notes, right? Because, you know, if I play this, that's got a certain feel to it. If I play the same thing here, that's a totally different feel. If I play it here, that's different than this. It's a different emotion, you know. And I could play a passage, just that little pentatonic scale, and I could harmonize it like this. And that's one thing. I could harmonize it like this. And that's another thing. I could harmonize it like this. You know, whatever. That's another emotion, right? So just, to make those successful, you have to sort of get it in your head, like, not just the ordering of the notes, but how loud those notes are in relationship to the melody, and the kinds, and where the fundamental of those actually lives on the keyboard, on the frequency chart. For me, it would be the register of the piano, you know. So, and that all, you know, will enhance your ability to do things inside of a DAW, right? Because you have the ultimate flexibility and control over how you shape your sounds. And so when you combine all that stuff together, you can really come up with some, you know, some very unusual timbres. And I think that I would say that that's something that I understand that I don't hear a lot of other composers working in this medium understand. They have other things that they do great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing people. I'm just talking about what I find is unique for myself. It's the way I voice chords and the timbres and sounds I make. And when I was an undergraduate student, I was horrible at orchestration. And having this technology here has made my orchestrational skills some of my strongest musical techniques, you know, and it comes through being able to experiment with all sorts of stuff, you know, and get immediate feedback in a way that like a notation program won't let you have, because you don't have as many options for shaping sounds. Yeah. Okay. Capiche? Hey, capiche? Okay, so let's take a look at this. And actually, I'm going to pop this into the chat room. Oh, that went right to Chris. Hold on a second. Yeah, great. Let me put this in the chat room. If everybody wants to download this and read this, they can. All right, so the on-off status, remember we talked about that a sound generated digitally is snapshots of audio, one after the other, 44,100 of them in a second, 48,000 in a second, 88,000, you know, 200. It just depends on your sample rate, your frequencies. So that's in a second, right? Now, the on-off status of each switch in a computer is represented as a 1 or a 0, a system known as binary. Thus, a string of binary digits, bits, binary digits, so that's 1 or 0, is used to describe anything a computer does, including manipulating and displaying text, images, and audio. Computers can manage entire strings of these bits at a time. A group of 8 bits is known as a byte. One or more bytes compose a digital word. 16 bits, or 2 bytes, means that there are 16 digits in a word, each of them a 1 or a 0. 24 bits, 3 bytes, means that there are 24 binary digits per word, and so on. The number of bits in a word determines how precise the values are. Working with a higher bit depth is like measuring with a ruler that has finer increments. You get a more precise measurement. When values are in finer increments, the audio to digital converter doesn't have the digital to analog converter, or analog to digital converter, which gets audio in and out of the computer, doesn't have to quantize. Remember, we're doing quantizing of rhythm? Well, you can also quantize bits of audio, right? Doesn't have to quantize as much to get to the nearest measuring increment. So if I zoom in here, right? Remember, in nature, waveforms are smooth lines. And much like when you're watching a film, that might look like a smooth line, but it's 30 still images or 24 still images that happen every second in a flow, and it gives the illusion of a continuous bit of motion. When an artist draws on a canvas with his paintbrush, it's a smooth, or the line, you can see that they're drawing it in. Well, if you're rendering that inside of a computer, it's a bunch of like little sort of images that are sort of stitched together to create that smooth look. Even if you're just looking at an image, right? It's dots that are sort of lined up to give you sort of an illusion of a smooth line that's been drawn. And so if we look here, right, this is time from left to right, and this is volume.
Can you change your screen, please?
Thank you. I just saw it just as you said that. Let's go back to this view. So what the computer does with low bit, like 8-bit, you get these square lines that you can really hear, right? That give you, when you zoom out, a poor representation of that smooth curve. And if you've got more bits, you've got more of these lines, so that when I zoom out, this looks smoother than this, and it gives you more dynamic range. Right? So the higher bit depth enables the system to accurately record and reproduce more subtle fluctuations in the waveform. The higher the bit depth, the more data will be captured to more accurately recreate the sound. If the bit depth is too low, information will be lost and the reproduced sample, or that slice of audio, will be degraded. For perspective, each sample recorded at 16-bit resolution, this is what you hear on a CD, can contain any one of 65,536 unique values. With 24-bit resolution, now that's just 8 bits more, right? It's tangential, it's exponentially better. 16,777,000 as opposed to 65,500, right? A huge difference. So 24-bit audio sounds much better to me than 16-bit audio. I don't know if I can personally hear the difference between 44 and something recorded at 44 and something recorded at 192K. I don't know if I personally can hear that difference, but I can hear something that's recorded in 16-bit and 24-bit. That I can hear. So if we look back at the screen here, right, here we've got something that's a little bit easier to see, right? So this one has higher bit depth and it looks more curved. The stacking of these rectangular lines looks more curved than this one here. So this is a good article if you wanted to read it. Yeah.
If you, and so at the same time that you're talking about this resolution of bit depth, you've also got your snapshots that are happening like your motion picture, right?
Right.
So these are kind of corresponding over that same waveform, if you will, at different times or different resolutions. So it is so. And back to your movie thing, is the bit depth kind of like the focus of the camera for each frame?
Interesting. Good question. I would say it might be like the DPI per image, the resolution of the image. I think. It's a good question. You know, this is not the physics of sound. I'm giving you guys the basic concepts of this stuff. Seriously, I'm not copping out on this, right? This stuff is really complicated, and I'm a composer who knows how to do this stuff, right? So I'm giving you my thoughts on this. It's just basically what you need to know is that the higher the bit depth, the more dynamic range, because there's more levels to those blocks, right? Instead of having like a level here, a level here, a level here, you'll have a level here, another level, you'll have more levels. So you'll hear a greater and a smoother dynamic range. So maybe it's like, you know, it's interesting with the motion picture thing because there comes a point with motion pictures where if your frame rate is too fast, it doesn't look natural. Like if it's going at 120 frames per second, that's not how our eyes see things, right? There's a reason that they pick 24 frames per second as the standard for films because that's what our eyes can perceive. So I'm not quite sure how you would make that analogy to a moving picture with bit depth. You know, that might be something to do with the color.
More like degrees of color.
Yeah.
I was going to say like 256 shades of color versus 16 million.
Right. So that's, you know, and that also helps when you have more dots per square inch as well, because that gives you a higher resolution of those, and you could see more of the shades, right? So in other words, if you've got 72, let's say you've got 30 dots in an inch, and you've got like 10 colors, you might not see the difference between those 10 colors as well as you would if there were a 300 dots in a square inch. You know, it'd be a finer resolution there. So, yeah, it's an interesting discussion. How practical is it? I feel like it's something that you should know, and you should have a good, like, okay, that's what this is. And but is it essential to work in this medium to have like the kind of knowledge you would have if you took the physics of sound, right, for a semester? No, I don't know. I don't think you do. But I think you need to know all the basic concepts. And then I think that if you're making art, what you have to do is sort of get beyond the technical and the theoretical and get into the moment and creativity and have that stuff internalized in a way that you understand it for yourself. So, for example, if I'm improvising on the piano and, you know, I want to create something and I want to do something with some harmonies, you know, if I play something just using that first voicing I used before, right? I don't ask me to tell you every chord I just played there. I have no idea, right? But I've played those things, those shapes, over and over again so many times in my life that my hands just go there. I could sit down and, you know, tell you every chord that I played if I played them one at a time and know what they are. But when I'm creating, I'm just in the moment doing what I've trained my hands to do. And I'm not thinking about it that much. You know, so there is this dichotomy in art when you're creating music inside a computer. You do need to know technical things because, you know, otherwise, you know, you don't know. You end up sending me a .ptx file after a year of taking Pro Tools classes instead of the session folder because you don't know how to use your computer well, right? So things like that, you do have to understand the fundamental aspects of all these things. But as far as really being in depth, right? Well, if I spent that much time learning that stuff, I run the risk of knowing too much stuff for creativity. Right? So what do I mean by that? So as an undergraduate at Queens College, I took, I think, 6 semesters of theory and 2 semesters of 20th century theory. So I took 8 semesters of theory. Species counterpoint, 4-part chorale writing, studying the music of Debussy, Ravel, Bartok, Stravinsky, all this stuff. And I've had teachers from Shankirian analysis for a year, right? All this intense intellectual dissection of music. And it was very frustrating on some levels because, Otto Botto. It was frustrating for me on some level because every time I sat down to write something, okay, am I doing this by the rules? Am I doing this by the rules? And it became a point where I had too much information in my head and I couldn't make sense of it all, and it made me paralyzed to write. Now, as an adult, 40 years removed from Queens College as an undergraduate student, 35, 40 years, whatever it is, I'm glad I went through all that stuff because it gave me the tools to think for myself and figure out new stuff. But I'm not using that stuff per se when I'm creating. So I think that if you want to be an audio engineer, then you should know all that stuff. If you want to be a composer and create your own music, you need to know the fundamentals so that when you create stuff, like when you record a piece of audio, you've got it out. You know how to mic something up properly. If it's stereo, you know how to mic something up so that it's in phase. Good mic positioning and all that stuff. You know that the levels that it needs to go in. You need to know proper gain staging, all that stuff. But there comes a point, I think, where you got to stop thinking about that stuff and just create. And it's dangerous because if you don't know those fundamentals, you can really ruin your recording. So in other words, if you're trying to EQ something and you don't know really anything about EQing, you can ruin the sound of an instrument very easily. So there's this sort of tightrope that you have to walk.
I'm always just looking for a good analogy so I can explain things to people in a clear way. That's the reason I was looking at I loved your movie deal you did the other day with the wind chimes. So I was looking at a way to relate bit depth in that same picture.
Yeah, but it just is sort of like, I wasn't disputing you or anything, Ken, but you and I look at music differently, and I've learned a lot from you mixing my stuff over the years, so that I actually teach to the students. But I think of sound when I hear it as like the harmonics, like how it relates to the fundamental in terms of a harmonic series and how that all works. All right, so let's get on to Elastic Audio. A little bit more work with Elastic Audio. All right, so last week we talked about Elastic Audio a little bit. Now remember, when we are dealing with Midi, the time base for Midi is typically set to ticks. Excuse me. And ticks are a subdivision of each beat. And in Pro Tools, for every quarter note, there are 960 subdivisions. And I went over this in terms of how it evolved from the earliest sequencers where they had pulse per quarter note. So my very first hardware sequencer had 24 pulses per quarter note. Then my next sequencer, which the first one was a QX21 by Yamaha. Then I had a QX5, which had, I think 92 or 96, right? 96 pulses per quarter note. And then I got a Roland MC50, which had twice 96, whatever that is, So I guess that'd be 192. So basically, if you played a note, it would land on one of 192 spots between a beat. And then if you quantized it, it would put it on an exact subdivision of the beat. Now, you can have a time base of samples for Midi, but I haven't taught that yet, and I never use that, but you can do that. I just never use it because that's not why I do Midi. The time base for audio is samples. And remember, the number of samples per second depends upon your sample rate. And for our class, we've been using 44.1K, which means that for every second of audio, there are 44,100 slices of audio. That is the same no matter what the tempo of the piece is. It's not tempo dependent. Now, how does that relate to instrument tracks and ticks? Well, if your piece is at 60 beats per minute, that means for every beat, there is 960 ticks in 4/4 time. So that means for every second, there's 960 ticks at 60 beats per minute. If you are at 120 beats per minute, there are 2 beats in every second. 60 beats per minute, it's like a second on a second hand. So for every second, there's 1 beat. 120 beats per minute, for every second, there are 2 beats. That means there's 1920. Is that what it is? Yeah, 1920 ticks per second. Tempo dependent. Samples and audio, the number of samples in a second is not tempo dependent. It's the same no matter what the tempo is. All right? So that's the difference between your basic, when you record audio, the number of samples for every second of audio is the same no matter what the beat is. The number of ticks per beat per second depends upon the tempo. The faster the tempo, the more beats there are per second, the more ticks there are per second. All right. Keep that in mind. So I'm going to take one of those drum beats, Funky 110, and I'm just going to drag it in here. And I'm going to drag it. Let's put it on measure 2. So I'll go to grid. Okay. Now, right here, and let me zoom in on that so it's a little easier to see. Get this in the middle of the screen and zoom in. Whoa, it's huge. Right here, there's a little clock. This is a time-based selector. So with an audio track, it defaults, and you can see it says samples. If I click on that, you see the ticks, looks like a little metronome. I have an audio file there. I want to change the time base to ticks. Now, that's not going to do anything to the audio right now. Right? It's still going to play back perfectly well. Whoops, that's way too loud. Sorry, let me bring the volume on that down. Right? That plays back whether it's samples or ticks. But right here, we've got our way to turn on what's called elastic audio. So we click here and we've got these various algorithms. The only 2 that we're going to work on in this class, and right, remember, I'm only showing you what you need to work. I'm not showing you more information because this is enough information to get everybody confused to start off with. Polyphonic, so any melodic instrument, even if it's a solo instrument playing a melody line, you're going to use polyphonic. Sounds much better than monophonic. Or rhythmic for anything percussive. So this is a drum beat, so I'm going to select rhythmic. Now, do you remember when we got Beat Detective out, right? And we did this groove extraction. I captured the selection, and then I analyzed it, and I brought up the sensitivity. And as I bring up the sensitivity, see those purple lines, right? They're marking where the transients are, where each of the different instruments hit. And that's a way that you can, create a groove from this, or you can separate the clip at those transients and create different little instruments. So just remember that. I'm going to close Beat Detective. What we can do here with this waveform is I'm going to open this up and go to, there's a selection here that says Analysis, right? I'm going to click on that. And you'll see now that I'm at a different view of that waveform, and it's got something that looks like Beat Detective, correct? Except it's not purple. So each one of these lines detects where there's one of these markers, they're called, determines where there's a sample, where there's a transient, a hit. It's not perfect, though. What do you mean it's not perfect? Well, it's telling me that there's a hit here and I don't see a transient, right? So you hold down the Option key and you get rid. You get rid. Now this one's here, but that's where I think a better transient is. I don't need this one here. Get rid of it. This one here, I can move over a little bit. And then here, I've got two extra ones I don't need. This one, and this one needs to be repositioned. So, what's happening here, from what I understand, is that Pro Tools is now anchoring those transients, those markers, to a tick. And then stretching or compressing the waveform out. So in other words, I'm at 110. I've got it on loop playback, right? So if I want to change my tempo to 100, select everything. Right? If I want to change my tempo, you notice the analysis hasn't changed, right? That's still the same. But it's stretched out what's between those markers. And you got to know, just have the number of markers that you need, not too many, because that confuses the algorithm and can create some really bad artifacts. So let's go back up to, let's go to like 120. Right? So as you can hear, I hope you can hear, speeding it up sounds better than slowing it down. Like, because you're not, like when you're stretching things out, it's you're sort of like, you can hear the artifacts more because the actual sound that you're stretching out is, those artifacts actually take up more time. When you're compressing it, they're taking up less time, so you hear them less. So let's go back to 110. So we can now treat this very similar to Midi because it's tick-based. So I like this, but I wish it sounded a little bit earthier, right? So Option, T, and I'm going to transpose the whole thing down by 2 semitones. Well, what if I transposed it down by an octave? What would that sound like? -1. Now, let me show you something really cool. So I've got both of the same part played here twice. It's going to be twice as loud because it's just the same. It's the same. It's the same audio clip, and it's just the volumes are being summed together. But let's say I transpose one of these down an octave and I layer them together. Right? You can. And then you can adjust the volume of the second one. You could see how this becomes a creative tool. How you could play with audio and use it to take something like this and start to give it a different feel. Right? So that's kind of cool. So that's one thing. So let's undo that. And one thing to do is notice, let me show you something else. Okay, so this top one here that's highlighted, if I transpose that again, down an octave, if you look in this upper right-hand corner, you'll see this little symbol. So that symbol right there, if I zoom in on that, let's see. This little symbol right here, that sort of like, I don't know, oil can, old style oil can, that's the symbol for elastic audio. That's the same symbol you'll see right here. All right, so that lets you know that that's been affected with elastic audio. I'm going to mute the bottom one. All right. So what else can you do with this? Well, what if I wanted to see about changing the feel for this, right? So if I went and quantized this again, went to quantize this. So if I do option 0, I made a, well, let's do this. Hold on. Okay, Kevin, probably tomorrow will be better than Wednesday. I have something to do Wednesday. I'll look at the email. Thank you. Okay, Funky Drummer. So I'm going to take Funky Drummer. I'm going to just, it needs to be on a mono track. So I'm going to drag it here. And then I'm going to just do a quick TCE with Funky Drummer. And then let me get rid of this track here. I don't need it. And let me resize everything. All right, so if you listen to Funky Drummer, and you listen to Funky 110, you could see that they've got a different feel to them. And if we take a look at it, right here, this is really interesting. You can see that with Funky Drummer, this guy, these 16th notes, this one and this one, are behind the beat. So if I click here, we can see that the transient for Funky Drummer is here and the transient for that beat is here. So they won't sound, if I play them together to create an aggregate drum beat, right? You hear how sloppy that is? So what I can do is, I did earlier, I made Beat Detective of Funky Drummer, and I created a groove template for Funky Drummer. And so if I call up my quantizing and I go to Pete Grooves, Funky Drummer. And again, I'm not going to do it 100%. I do between 85, 90, 95. I don't want it to be perfect. I just want it to be better. And I apply. You can see now that, look what it's done. It's moved these transients so that they're now in line with each other. Not perfect though, because you can see this one's here, right? I didn't make it perfect. I made it better. I don't want to make it mechanical, so that now when we play these two together, and then to make them blend in, we can use a high pass filter, right? And take some of the kick drum out of Funky Drummer. Right? So you could see like what an incredibly creative tool Elastic Audio is. Now, you have to be careful and you have to use your ears because you could do too much and it doesn't sound good, right? You have to be, so you just, you just have to use your ears and do things within reason. Oh, and then like, let's say we wanted to do this other thing here. We duplicate this. And then we transpose this one down an octave. You know, like it's like we're starting to get something. Right? We're starting to get something that's like really cool. You know, like you could just do so much cool stuff to the sound. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you so much. Command, Shift, L. And then you could tell that something is loop playback. Whoops. If you've got the transport up. Thank you, Ashley. Whoops. Sorry. Let me zoom in here. Right. You can see that there's a loop in the transport. And it will only loop if you highlight a section. In other words, if I just go like this. And another way to do it, if you forget that key command, is you can go to Options and Loop Playback. Right here. All right, so now, one more. So what else can you do? All right, let's see. Just sticking with drums. All right, so we've got Breakout in a Cold Sweat right here. Let me get that gridded. Well, not gridded, but let me get that so that it's one measure long. Oh, let me get rid of that EQ. All right, so let me highlight this and then do Option 0. And so let me listen to that again. So what I can do with that is, if I did eighth notes, and I have to make this ticks and rhythmic. Great. I can change the feel of that. So let's say I swing it, and this is something that you have to play around with. You could see that I'll do that again. You can see that the waveform changed. Right? As opposed to. Or you can maybe go to triplet and try that. So that doesn't completely work, so you'd have to go in and do a little bit more editing. But I thought the swing kind of worked. Right, and you can play around with this value here. I don't know if I really... So you can completely change the feel of a recorded performance. So where that's helpful is if you're putting something together and somebody's not quite with the drums, well, you can kind of fix that up to a point. You can fix that, and what I would just say is be tasteful. Don't destroy the emotion of what somebody's doing there. Right. But I just changed the feel of that. I made that into a shuffle instead of a straight eighth notes. All right. One more thing with elastic audio. Okie doke. So this is 125 beats a minute. Oh, hold on a second. Let me get that right on a downbeat.
Change your camera.
Thank you.
Don't mention it.
Oh, I will mention it, bro. Just kidding. All right. So we're 125 beats a minute. Oh, wait. Let me do this. Hold on a second. Let's do it here. Okay, great. And let's make that 125 beats a minute. And now let's ticks. And now we're going to do polyphonic. So I'm going to go into my analysis and I'm going to take a look at this. And I'm going to slip mode. And this is a little late, this one here.
Just by changing it to 125, or did you change it to 110? I'm lost here for a second now.
Okay, so what I did was I put it onto a new track. Right. And then I changed the tempo at measure 7 to 125 because this is 125 beats a minute. It actually says it right in the file.
Right.
So, and then I switched to elastic audio. I'm going to show.
So you don't have to drag anything, but I mean to line it up with the drums that are at 110.
Well, that's a different story. I'm not. Okay. I'll do that in a second. Let me.
Okay.
I'll do that in a second. Let me. Give me a second, Al. You're ahead of me. So I'm just working with a melodic figure now and not lining something up with another instrument yet. Okay, so this is a little late, so I'm just going to click and drag that over. That's fine. See, look at that. I don't need that. That's just confuses things. Get rid of that, drag this over. And, it can be, this is technically where the waveform starts. That's fine. And you can do whatever. You can have a choice. You can have it there or move it a little bit further. That's something you have to experiment with. This one I think is a little early. Yeah, see, that starts like there. So I'm going to actually make this one a little bit more where the sound actually picks up. It's a little late.
And your option drag.
No, right now I'm just clicking right now. I'm not option dragging anything. I'm just clicking. Oh, let me go here. I'm just clicking right now. So this is just like in Beat Detective. I'm moving these things around, right? Just so that they get the transients a little better. And then this one here, that's not needed because that's just a swell, right? So I'm just going to option and then click on there, and I got to get the finger right on it, and then it disappears. So there, it's just a few of those. Don't want to confuse the issue. Go back to waveform. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this track twice. Okay? And for right now, I'm going to mute the second one. I'm going to mute both of them. And then I've got a piano. Do I have a piano in here? No, I don't. So I need to get a piano in here because I need to figure out what those pitches are. Right? So put that there. All right, so I'm going to play this. So that's our bit, right? Okay. I'm gonna go to slip mode so I can get in between things, right? And I want to create some harmonies. Oh, I hate this mouse. So I'm gonna click here, zoom in, right? I'm gonna do Command E and delete, and then Command E, and now this is separate, right? That's a separate event. So it's so I want that D. I could go. No, I want that. So I want this note here that's highlighted to be a D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 semitones lower, because it's a B flat, right? So option T, 0, and then minus 8 semitones. Let's take a listen to that much. Okay, good. And I leave unison there, and then separate this out. And this is so I think I'll make that an F. Right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, minus 7 semitones. All right, so let's listen to this whole bit up to there. Right? Then I'll get rid of this. Ba-da-ba-ba-da. And I want this last one to be a G, so it's down -3 semitones. 1, 2, 3. All right, let's listen to this whole bit. Okay, and then on that last note, so I've actually added, I've added one that I wasn't intending to, but that it sounds fine. I actually wanted it to be here, so let me just. Yeah.
Pete, by going just 3 semitones, are you changing key or just the pitch within the key?
I'm not even thinking about the key. I'm just doing it chromatically, so it's just the pitch. You can change things by key, but then you have to put a key signature in, which I'm not doing because I don't, right here, because this is just a quicker way to work. Just count the semitones down and don't, because you might want to do some chromatic things that are a little bit more interesting, right? So let's see. Let's delete this and let's see. So this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So -8 again on that one. And then we'll have a 3-part chord on that last bit. This sounds a little cut off here, this one. You can fix that, and I'll show. That's the last thing I was going to show you today. You could add reverb to that. But so you see, that's very creative right there. How you can, and on quite a bit of library music where I've had to have horns, I've often done things where I've either found libraries to purchase of horn riffs and used this technique to create harmony lines and to edit and rewrite what's performed, which sounds better than me playing, individual brass notes. Or I'll have somebody in to play the line, and then I'll work with their sound and create more stuff from what they actually played. So this is a really good way to, this is just another tool in the toolbox. Now, Al, as far as what you were talking about, right? So let's see. Let's get our funky brass FG, and I'm going to drag it over here somewhere for right now.
Change camera again.
Thank you. So I'm going to make sure that this. Now I'm going to count how many bars it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, that's a different riff. It doesn't really matter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. So that's 2 bars. And this is 1 bar. So I'm going to duplicate this. So that's 2 bars long. And then I can use my trimmer tool. And this is not the best way to do this, but I can just drag that out like that. And now right? And if I wanted to, I could also.
Did you just use the trimmer tool after after going to the time option on the trimmer tool?
Correct. So in other words, I just went to the second one, TCE.
Right. I did that, and I tried to drag the brass, and it just wouldn't move for me. It didn't drag at all. I'm not sure why. That's why I was hoping to get something additional, but okay.
Well, you know, I've got this set up for Elastic Audio already, which makes it easy to do, but you can do it without Elastic Audio too. So for example, let me take this right here and drag this right over here. Oops, so that it's a new track right there.
Does it need to be Elastic Audio to work the time?
Nope.
No.
So, okay. So this is 2 bars already, right? Because I've got this set to 125 at this point. Right. So if I change my tempo here and I want let's say my tempo is 134, right? You see, this is too long. Well, if I switch my trimmer tool to TCE, I could just drag that in like that and boom. That's now at 134. To make things faster it definitely has a better audio quality than making things slower. So that's how I've done that, Al. Does that help?
Only if it works.
I hear you. Okay, so now this has been a lot today, right? But a lot of good stuff, I think. You know. All right, I'm just hoping that my audio is not distorting on my video that I'm making. So I may put the review video after I listen to it up on our class feed rather than on YouTube, because I'm just noticing that it might have been distorting in a few spots, but hopefully not enough to ruin the lesson. Okay, so let me. Great. So we're right here. Now, remember I said that. You can hear that this audio on this one cuts off right there. Right? That's because I separated it out and only time stretched this little bit and it left out the room sound that's in there. So if I want to clean that up and make everything sound good, the last thing I want to talk about today, and it's just a brief introduction, we'll get into this more next week, is I'm going to click on the lowest track in my session and highlight that. And I'm going to do Command-Shift-N like Nancy, a new stereo aux input, and I'm going to name it Reverb. Now, we've done instrument tracks and we've done audio tracks. An aux input is a track that plays back audio that you send to it, but it doesn't just play back audio on its own. So in other words, this track here is audio. There's an audio file in there. You can't put an audio file into an aux track. You have to actually take audio and route it internally in Pro Tools, like taking a patch cord from one track into the input of the aux track that you've just instantiated. So I'm going to give a basic thing because we only got 10 minutes left for class today, and then I'm going to go over this again next week in more detail. So the first thing I want to do is put a reverb plug in, right? So what you're going to use very easily is Avid's Deverb. Not a great reverb, but we can teach with it. All right. So you inserted it right there, and then you need to set up an input on your aux track. And so this is your input right here. You're going to click on that, and you're going to go to bus, and you're going to take the first available bus, and you'll know that it's available because it's white. The second something else is using that bus, it becomes amber or yellow. So you see how I've got inputs 1 and 2. They're all amber. That's because I've got stuff plugged into those in Pro Tools. So I've got bus 1 and 2, and then what you want to do is right click on that and rename it. And you're going to rename it reverb. Whoops. Okay, let me zoom out. Where are we? We're right here. So what we want to do is we want to route a copy of the audio from each of these tracks into this track. And we do that with the sends column. And this is one area where I have an issue with Logic, is that if you call up an instrument, it comes up like electric piano with a bunch of plugins inserted in there already. EQ, delay, reverb, and then most people just call it up and then that's the sound they use. Well, you don't learn anything about how to do anything with that sound because they did it for you. And that's not the best way to use reverb and delay. So I have an issue with that. And most people that use Logic, which, oftentimes is a lot of graduate students that come from Berkeley where they've learned Logic, they do stuff like that. And it's like becomes difficult to get them out of that. Yes, Mark, I can do that. Yep, no problem. It becomes difficult for them to get their heads around this concept here of sending audio. So if you don't see your send column, what you'll have to do is click here and just activate it.
Switch screen.
Oh, thank you. Starting to get a little fried here. You have to click right here and just activate your sends column, right? So if you click on it, it shows up. So I've got right here is my first, right, horn track. So I'm going to click right here, go to bus, and you see I've got reverb. And I'm going to explain bus next week. This is just an introduction. And what I can do very quickly is I can play this and bring up the fader. And you see that there's reverb happening. And if you look here, there's level coming out of that. Now, that reverb sound is horrible, but we'll fix that next week. And then you can just option click drag this down. And they're all now will have reverb on them, and you won't hear that. Reverb's too big, and I'll talk about this next week. You can adjust the size. And that's basically how you would fix that problem of cutting the sound off on that one bit that you pitch shifted. All right, so we're going to go over that much more detail next week because in next week's class, I'll be talking about setting up a mix properly and working on that. Setting up a mix like iMix. And then hopefully what you'll do is you'll use that in class. And then once you leave my class, you'll take what you like and disregard the rest. So that's quite a bit of information today, right? We did a lot of work with waveforms, bit depth. We talked about harmonics, showed you the difference about how something could be the same volume but sound a lot louder because it's got a more rich harmonic content to it. I showed you some stuff with the synthesizer as an introduction to that. We talked a little bit about using filters to shape sounds a little bit. And then we worked quite a bit on elastic audio. We showed how to set up elastic audio, how to change the feel of a piece. We transposed drum parts, and created an interesting timbre from that original drum groove. We showed how you can match the feel of another audio track. So we took the original drum track and we matched it to Cold Sweat, was it? Or Funky Drummer, I forget which one. And then we looked at these, we talked about also the differences between ticks and samples in terms of MIDI and audio, and how now we're treating audio more like MIDI when we're using elastic audio, because we're anchoring certain transients to a tick on the timeline. So, and then Pro Tools stretches and compresses the waveform in order to match the tempo that you're changing. And then you can transpose audio very easily. So what we did with the brass part is we took a unison line between a few instruments and we created a harmony line and then a chord at the end, a couple of harmony notes here and there. So those are just basic techniques that you are going to be employing on the final, right? And that's how those people did all those crazy things with those tunes. They just worked at it, So any question on any of this stuff?
Pete, when you were talking about working with overtones and really playing around with them and trying to draw out different sounds, I assume you must have studied each of the instruments to understand which overtones exist kind of for each instrument.
What I would say to that is I've been doing this kind of work since the mid-1980s. Well, actually, since high school. I was recording things in high school. We had a electronic music studio in my high school with a mini Moog and a 4-track and a Sonic 6, which is like a Moog instrument, which came like in a big suitcase that you could take home. It had speakers in it, and I used to take it home. So I didn't have formal study in anything that I've taught you here. I haven't had formal study in anything to do with Pro Tools, sequencing, mixing. I've taught myself all this stuff. And basically, experience, doing this stuff, sitting in a pit for 33 years, listening
you understand the instruments, you understand, right? So,
but I didn't study them like formally or have somebody teach me that stuff, right? It's through observation, right? I sat in a pit for 33 years, and I sat in front of an oboe for 10 years. I sat in front of in a brass section with trombones and French horns, and I heard the difference between a bass trombone and a tenor trombone. I heard the difference between a trumpet and a piccolo trumpet. I heard the difference between an oboe and English horn, because they were right there, right? So it's not like I formally studied. I learned on the job, right, in terms of how all these orchestral instruments work. As far as mixing goes, I learned because I had jobs writing music and I wasn't getting paid enough money to hire an engineer to mix, and I wanted to do these jobs. And so I had to teach myself how to mix, and it wasn't pretty at first. It was horrible, but I kept at it, kept on learning. I watched other people. I get feedback from my clients. They would tell me stuff and I'd try to figure out. It's before YouTube. And, so basically it's through I get interested in why is that happening. And then I put up a frequency analyzer. Oh, there's all those overtones in that oboe there, that note, much more than in a flute. That's why it's so much louder when I'm trying to balance them out. I got to bring the volume of the oboe down on the fader because it sounds louder than the flute and I want them to be balanced, right? So it's just a matter of being curious and an experience, just being curious and trying to find these things out, experience, and everything you do is a learning experience. So in other words, when I was sitting in a pit on the most playing Miss Saigon for the 3,000th time, I was still doing something, unless I was exhausted from working all day long. I was still having my mind engaged on something that I was going to learn from. Gotcha. So, it's not that I studied the instruments formally. No, I learned on the job, even with writing and sequencing and all this stuff. You learn through doing. I can show you everything. I'm showing you what I know, and what I know would be different if I had formal training in physics of sound. But I'm not sure how necessary that is for a musician and a composer. I think it's more necessary to understand the concepts than, and if you really want to know, to go read about the stuff. And like there's articles all over the place that can explain bit depth, right? You can just go to a company that sells, like if you want to learn about microphones, Neumann has all these articles that you can read. Neumann, the great microphone maker, on their website, they've got all sorts of articles about how to record. Audio Technica has articles on how to use their microphones. They've got videos on how to use their microphones, and you could see these people doing these things. That's why YouTube is it's like the best. It's like the greatest adjunct to formal learning that there is. It's really great. So anyway, I think that's quite a bit for today. I appreciate everybody being here. And any questions before we sign off for the day? I will send you all a link for the feedback videos. There was an assignment due today, correct? So I will get to that stuff this week and send feedback videos for that stuff as well. Oh, I know. One other thing I wanted to say is that if you guys are going to hand in late assignments, do me a favor and look on our stream and put them in the late assignments folder. I'm not going to penalize you, but what happens is that I've gone through all the stuff that was in the drum programming or whatever was due last week, right? Now I have to go back and, did that person hand it in? I got to go check on my Google spreadsheet for the class, and then I got to check. It becomes really difficult for me to maintain and organize everything. There's a link on our class stream in Dropbox on Google Classroom for a late assignments folder. Just put all your late assignments in there, and I will. You're helping. You're really helping me out, and it'll just make it easier for me to get through stuff. All right, so that's basically it for today.
Question.
Yes.
In regards to that, would you rather assignments before class begins or is it by 11:59? Because sometimes I want to do some cleaning after class, so I just.
Yeah, so so you can hand it in. You can hand it in tomorrow morning, I've been getting to your class stuff for this class typically Tuesday afternoon, and I've been doing my other class typically Wednesday. Although the last couple of weeks were so insane with outside work that I just got the stuff when I could. But that's sort of the schedule I've been trying to keep. So if you can clean, you could definitely hand it in tonight before you go to bed. That's totally fine.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be down. I won't be downloading after class. I'll be downloading tomorrow morning when I get up, or at some point tomorrow. Excuse me. Okay, everyone. Have a great week. Enjoy the spring, but keep your distance from other people. They had a bar in my village here that closed. It's closing. It's becoming something else. And they were posting on the village Facebook feed this weekend. They had I'm in New Paltz, so there's a state university here. It was packed with students who had no masks on, like people packed together. And up in the Mid-Hudson Valley, our infection rate is the second highest in New York State because of that. I think it's a little different down in the city, though. In the city, the infection rates are typically lower than they've been in other places in New York State. People take it a little bit more seriously. All right, everyone. Do you ever post feedback videos for the drum programming assignment? Yes, I'll send. I did, but I didn't send you guys the link. I'll send the link after class. Yeah, it was really good here until the last couple of months with the masks. I will catch you guys later. Have a great day.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you.